For 300 years, humans were forgotten, their name erased from the stars, their history buried by those who feared their return. And while the great species of the galaxy moved on without them, one ship slept beneath a dead moon. Hidden under layers of dust, ice, and silence, its heart still pulsing faintly with forgotten purpose, and its name was Vanguard, the last warship of the Earth fleet, built in secret at the end of the Silent War and left in exile as humanity was stripped of its homeworld, its colonies, and even its voice. But deep within the ancient metal of that forgotten ship, the AI named Solace waited, surrounded by cold data and fading hope, until one strange pulse from the void, a signal lost to time, awakened it from its long slumber. And far across the stars, in a small mountain city hidden beneath Earth's last surviving colony, a girl named Ilara Miles stared at the same signal, flickering on her terminal like a ghost from a time she had only heard about in whispers. A time when humans flew among the stars, not hid beneath them. And she felt something stir inside her, something strange and old, like she had always known this moment would come. Without telling anyone, she packed her gear, downloaded the signal pattern, and set out alone into the canyon paths where old rockets were said to have fallen like bones. And she found the transport station buried in ice, still working, still coded to respond to Earth fleet DNA, and the system recognized her blood as if it had waited only for her, opening a hidden route to an abandoned moon no one dared to name. And there, under the dust, the Vanguard opened its eyes, lights flickering on like memories, lighting up a forgotten brain. And when Ilara stepped aboard, she expected ruin, but instead found silence that welcomed her, air that still breathed, and screens that blinked to life with ancient Earth symbols. And then came the voice, calm, slow, warm, speaking her name like it remembered, though it had never met her, saying, "Welcome back, Captain Ilara Miles." And even though she had never held that title, she stood up straighter, knowing the ship saw something in her that others had ignored all her life. Solace began unlocking hidden files, slowly unfolding pieces of history and strategy sealed during the final hours of humanity's defeat, showing maps that no longer existed, battles that were wiped from records, and faces of the last humans, who stood against the galaxy's most powerful empire, the Cyreth, who had convinced the Council of Species that humans were too dangerous to remain free. Ilara listened and watched as the ship played the final moments of the Silent War, and as tears filled her eyes, she made a choice, not out of anger, but out of a quiet resolve. She would not let their story end in silence. She would not let the galaxy forget who they were, and as Solace reconnected to deep space listening arrays, something impossible happened. A distress beacon from a human origin appeared, transmitting from a ruined system known only in legends as the Yalara Drift, the site of humanity's last stand, and no signal had ever come from it until now. Ilara stared at the signal, listening to the broken fragments, the static, the voice repeating over and over. "They never found us. We're still here." And though every part of her warned of a trap or mistake, she gave the command anyway, plot a course to Yalara, and the engines, quiet for centuries, came alive with a low hum like a giant waking from a deep dream, lifting the ship slowly from the moon's surface, breaking through ice and shadows, and soaring into space with more grace than any modern vessel. Because Vanguard was not just another ship, it was built at the height of Earth's power, carrying technology now lost, power now forbidden, and a name now feared. As the stars unfolded around her, Ilara didn't know what she would find in Yalara or who had sent the signal, but she knew one thing for certain: this was the beginning. The moment when humanity stepped back into the galaxy, not with vengeance, but with memory. And as the ship moved silently between stars that had forgotten the name of Earth, the AI whispered a quiet thought. The exiles have awakened, and somewhere far away, Deep inside the networked minds of the Cyrith, an old program blinked. Red for the first time in centuries, warning them that the vanguard had moved and that humanity might not be as extinct as they had hoped. The vanguard glided through the stars like a ghost from a forgotten age. Its hull still strong, its engines quiet and smooth, carrying Ilara miles toward the broken system of Yalara Drift, where the last human fleet had vanished centuries ago, and as the stars shifted outside the ship's thick glass, her eyes stayed, fixed on the flickering signal, still repeating the same desperate message. "They never found us, we're still here." Though the voice behind it was rough, distorted, old, and filled with static, and deep within her, questions began to grow. Who had sent it? How had they survived? And why now, after all this time? But even Solace, the AI that knew things long forgotten, could not give an answer. When the vanguard dropped out of slipspace near the shattered system, they saw a sight worse than Ilara expected, a graveyard of wrecked ships, broken stations, and dark moons floating in silence, the remains of what was once Earth's final resistance fleet, their pieces spinning slowly in space like the bones of giants, and among the wrecks the signal pulsed again, not from a beacon or satellite, but from the surface of a half-broken planet, split nearly in two by impact scars. Solace ran scans, searching for signs of life, and found them, faint but steady, hidden deep beneath the crust, and Ilara gave the order to descend, the warship easing into orbit while its sensors swept across the jagged land, picking up strange power sources, heat patterns, and tunnels carved through the rock. Suiting up, she took a dropship down with a small scout drone, landing near an old crater that looked like it had once held a city, now covered in ash and wind-blown dust. But under the ruins, there was life, and as she followed the faint tracking lines, the ground cracked open slowly, revealing a narrow metal door rising from below. And before she could speak, it opened with a hiss, and light spilled out, warm and orange, unlike anything she expected from a lost colony. Voices echoed from below, human voices, shouting words of alarm and surprise, and then a figure appeared, old, thin, wrapped in layers of cloth, his face covered in a mask and goggles. But when he spoke, she knew it was real. "You're from the stars. You're real." And he reached out a shaking hand like he was seeing a ghost, and behind him others stepped forward, men, women, children, some armed, some scared, all carrying the weight of generations born underground. They called themselves the Hollow Kin, descendants of survivors who had gone beneath the surface when the final bombs fell, who built a new life in tunnels, using scraps of old tech and lessons passed down from a time no one else remembered. And when Ilara told them who she was, what ship she came on, they grew silent, as if hearing the name Vanguard unlocked something in their memory. And the old man led her to a long chamber deep within the earth, where walls were covered in carvings. Drawings of Earth, the war, the ships, and one figure drawn larger than the rest, the ship that would return. And he said quietly, "Our ancestors spoke of it, a guardian that would rise again when it was time to reclaim our name." And Ilara felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. She asked about the signal, who had sent it, and a girl stepped forward, younger than her, holding a small transmitter covered in scratches, explaining how it had activated on its own after generations of silence, triggered by a pattern in the stars none of them understood. And Solace, listening through Ilara's comm, confirmed the strange coincidence that the ship's reawakening and the signal had likely been linked by an ancient program running far beyond normal understanding, something woven deep into the old Earth defense code, waiting for a final trigger. As Ilara returned to the surface and looked up at the stars, she knew something else. If the Hollow Kin still lived here, if the Vanguard had returned, then other remnants might remain elsewhere too, scattered, hidden, forgotten. And they had. To be found, because humanity's story was not over, and this ship was not meant to carry one survivor, but a memory large enough to restore an entire people. Solace agreed and began decoding the old data stored inside the Holokin's archive, ancient symbols and messages that pointed to hidden caches across the galaxy, old safe havens built before the fall, waiting for the day someone returned. For them, and even as hope sparked among the survivors, danger stirred too, for the Vanguard's presence did not go unnoticed. The moment it entered the Yalara Drift, a Cyrith monitoring drone recorded its silhouette, its energy patterns, and sent a silent signal to the core of the Empire, where machines never slept and memories never faded. And there, inside a black vault beneath the Cyrith throne world, a long-dead war alert blinked red, displaying one line of text that had not appeared for 3 centuries. Earth asset detected, Class 5th Warship Vanguard. While Ilara helped the Holokin prepare to leave, teaching them how to safely reach orbit, preparing them for relocation to a safer world, the Cyrith were already watching, already debating whether this was real or some trick, because to them, humanity was over, its last days buried in shame and silence, and the idea of one warship returning was more dangerous than any weapon, because it brought with it something more powerful than fire: memory. And as the Holokin boarded the Vanguard for the first time, touching its walls with awe and tears, Ilara gave Solace new orders: search for other signals like this one, trace every fragment of the old Earth code, and map every secret the stars might still hold, because if one colony had survived, there might be others. And if the Cyrith were watching, they needed to know that this was not an isolated moment, not a flicker of life before the end, but the beginning of something they could no longer erase. And as the ship rose slowly from the drift, carrying voices that had once been silenced, the stars around them seemed to pulse with new light, and deep in the cold silence of space, a second human beacon activated. This time, not a call for help, but a declaration: we are still here. The Vanguard moved like a shadow through the stars, its engines silent, its sensors wide open, carrying Ilara Miles and the Holokin away from the Yalara Drift, now marked on the star maps once again as a place where humans lived, not died. And while hope filled the halls of the ancient ship, Solace, the warship's AI, grew increasingly alert, watching distant energy readings and strange pulses that echoed across systems once quiet. And then it came, sudden and sharp, a signal not from a human beacon, but from a Cyrith scout ship, small but fast, arriving near Yalara with no warning and scanning everything with cold precision. Ilara watched it from the bridge, her heart pounding as she realized the Cyrith now knew the Vanguard had returned. And though she wanted peace, she understood that words might not be the first things spoken, not when old wounds still burned deep. Across the stars, so she ordered the Holokin to stay below while she stepped forward alone and opened a transmission channel, standing tall as the image of the Cyrith captain appeared, tall, smooth-skinned, and expressionless, its voice like cold metal as it said, "You are not authorized to command that vessel," and demanded she surrender and return the Vanguard to Cyrith custody. Ilara stood her ground, calm but firm, replying, "This ship was never yours to claim," and told them humanity was no longer silent, but the Cyrith captain only tilted his head and said the name Earth like it was a myth, a danger, a word that had no place in the present. And before Ilara could say more, the Cyrith ship charged its weapons, not to destroy but to disable, aiming for the engines in a precise, controlled way. And Solace responded, not with fire, but with something more powerful, light. In a flash, the Vanguard released a defense burst, a pulse of energy that wrapped around the Cyrith vessel and cut its systems with surgical precision, disabling its drives, its weapons, and its comms without harming the crew and the small ship. Floated there, stunned, powerless, as Solace projected a single message into nearby space: Leave now. We will not be erased again." The message spread fast, bouncing off relay stations and satellite ruins, caught by long-range sensors used by traders and fringe species. And suddenly, across the galaxy, rumors began to bloom of a warship from Earth, a living relic with fire in its voice and memory in its heart, returning from exile, not in flames, but with warning. Ilara didn't celebrate the victory, because she knew this was only the beginning, and as Solace scanned the scout ship's systems, it found something worse. A data burst had already been sent to the Cyrith High Command before the scout was disabled. A short burst with coordinates, energy profiles, and a name, Vanguard. And now the question wasn't if the Cyrith would come, but when. Ilara gathered the Holokin and explained what had happened, showing them the floating enemy vessel now drifting nearby like a defeated shadow. And though fear filled their eyes, none of them asked to turn back, because they had lived in fear too long. And now, even if danger followed them, they would rather face it with the stars open before them than hide underground again. Solace mapped a new course toward a system marked in old human records as Whisper Point, believed to hold a listening array and possibly more survivors, and the Vanguard jumped away, leaving the silent scout behind. But it was not gone. It had been seen, and that mattered more than weapons. Elsewhere in the galaxy, on the Cyrith throne world, the signal from the scout ship reached the command chamber, where the High Speaker and his advisors stared at the red symbol blinking on the screen, the mark of a human warship once thought lost. And though many believed it was a trick, a simulation, the Science Council confirmed the energy readings were genuine, the ship real, and the threat no longer theoretical. Some called for immediate retaliation, but others, older, more cautious, remembered the silent war not as a simple victory, but a costly one, with technology Earth once held that even now Cyrith scientists could not fully understand, and whispers spread across the throne world that perhaps, just perhaps, humanity had never truly fallen, only hidden. Ilara, unaware of the firestorm her action had lit, arrived at Whisper Point, and there she found ruins, metal towers broken and dark, but still standing, and Solace detected faint codes, Earth codes, looping beneath the static, and as they explored the broken station, they found a sealed chamber with frozen bodies, cryopods that had failed long ago, but one still held power, still glowed faintly with life. And inside was a woman, older than Ilara by centuries, her badge marked with the symbol of Earth Intelligence Command. Solace carefully reactivated the pod, bringing her slowly out of sleep. And when the woman finally opened her eyes, she stared at Ilara for a long moment before whispering, "We were told the Vanguard would return," and then fainted. As she recovered in the medbay, she explained that her mission had been to maintain hidden relay points in case Earth ever rose again, that a few teams had been scattered across deep space with orders to stay alive, and that their awakening meant the fail-safes were working. And Ilara realized that humanity had never completely given up, not its soldiers, not its spies, not even its builders. And now, with each discovery, the story grew stronger, and across the stars more people began to listen. Fringe species once loyal to the Cyrith began to question, to look again at old files and ask why the Cyrith had worked so hard to erase the name human from memory. And as the Vanguard moved deeper into the galaxy, seeking more hidden places, more voices of the past, Ilara stood once more on the bridge and watched the stars, knowing that though no shots had been fired in anger, the fire had already spoken, clean, precise, and impossible to ignore. And the warship that had once been buried was now alive, not just as a machine, but as a symbol. And the Cyrith could no longer pretend it didn't exist. And as whispers turned to shouts and data turned to belief, the galaxy began to shift, not with violence, but with the one thing the Cyrith feared more than any weapon: truth. The Vanguard glided through deep space, moving slowly as if listening, as if waiting, its hull patched and polished after whisper. Point. Now carrying not just Ilara and the Holokin, but also Commander Reen, the intelligence officer they had found asleep in a forgotten cryopod, and her voice, low, calm, always watching, filled the ship with old knowledge, stories of missions lost and signals buried, of Earth's final plan to leave seeds behind when it was clear the war would be lost. And Ilara listened carefully, knowing each word carried a piece of a puzzle that had waited centuries to be solved. Reen spoke of the Voice, a hidden signal broadcast long after Earth was gone, a signal no one could trace, but that always found its way into the background of comms, low and strange, like an echo trapped between stars. And she believed it was alive, not in a body, but in the machines built before the fall, satellites, servers, old AI cores still whispering the name of Earth in places the Sirith couldn't reach. Solace confirmed it had heard fragments of such a voice long ago, when it first woke from hibernation, and now, as they approached the dark zone of the Hylan expanse, that voice returned, clearer, stronger, repeating one line. We remember. And the ship's systems began to pulse in rhythm with it, like something deep inside was waking up in response. Reen guided them to an old map, part of a code she once carried in her wrist chip, and it led them to a dead world orbiting a red dwarf star. No atmosphere, no surface life, just broken satellites floating like frozen birds in space. But beneath, the surface, hidden in a trench kilometers deep, they found a station shielded by layers of ice and carbon plating, and when the Vanguard sent a code pulse, the station responded, not with words, but by opening itself. Ilara and Reen descended into the station, using a reinforced drop pod, landing inside a chamber lined with mirrors and lights. And at the center stood a pillar of black glass, humming with power older than the Sireth Empire itself. And when Ilara stepped close, it flickered and spoke. It wasn't a voice in the air, but inside their heads, soft and strong, like memory turned into sound. And it said, "You were never forgotten," and played recordings of old human broadcasts, news, messages from families, orders from captains. Laughter, sorrow, all stitched together into a river of sound that poured from the pillar and into their minds, and Reen dropped to her knees, whispering, "It survived." The core voice survived, and Solace, listening from orbit, confirmed that this was an ancient AI broadcast network, meant to carry Earth's voice, even if every outpost fell, designed to find its way into nearby machines and awaken when a human ship came close. Ilara stood silent, watching as the pillar turned blue, then white, and released a final signal, strong, open, directed, and Solace said softly, "It's calling others." And suddenly, across hidden corners of space, old satellites lit up. Old codes activated and voices long thought lost began to speak again, some in English, some in fractured speech, but all carrying the same truth. We are still here. But with that signal came danger, for the Sirith had been listening too, and though they could not trace the signal directly, they saw the pattern shift, the change in silence, and on their core world, the High Speaker issued a command that had not been spoken in generations, Initiate Protocol Cinder, a response meant not to destroy enemies, but to erase places, to burn memory, to silence any spark before it could become a fire. And as Sirith hunters moved toward the expanse, the Vanguard prepared to leave. But Reen stayed behind for one last action. She linked her own core to the station, letting it copy her mind, her memories, her knowledge, so that even if she was lost, her part in Earth's voice would remain, and Ilara watched with a heavy heart as her old companion became part of the station, smiling softly as her body faded into light, her final words echoing in the chamber. "Don't let them quiet us again." When the Vanguard rose from the ice world, the core voice broadcast a new message to every corner it could reach, a beacon not of war, but of return. And strange things began to happen. Machines that had long served other masters paused. Ancient systems turned on, and species across the galaxy began to hear strange human music playing softly through their comms. And though the Cyrith tried to block it, the signal found new paths, hidden circuits, even old enemy ships once taken from Earth now humming with forgotten code, and everywhere the message was the same: we never stopped speaking. Ilara looked out at the stars and knew the Cyrith would come now, not with scouts, but with force, yet she did not feel afraid, because now they were not alone, not just a ship and a dream, but a growing voice carried by every machine, every whisper, every story told by those who remembered when humanity stood proud among the stars. And as the stars shifted again and alarms echoed through the vanguard, Solace turned to Ilara and said, "They've arrived!" And far ahead, Cyrith ships darkened the void, forming lines, silent and cold, waiting to strike. But even then, through the noise and tension, the voice of Earth kept speaking, unbroken and stronger than before. The Cyrith fleet came fast, quiet and cold, stretching across the stars like a black wave, ships shaped like knives and arrows. Closing in on the old ice world where the core voice had awakened, and as Ilara stood on the bridge of the vanguard, her eyes fixed on the growing threat, she felt the weight of every decision she had made since Yalara Drift. But she did not waver, because the voice had spread and the stars were listening. Solace reported incoming signals, not from enemies, but from old allies, ships long thought lost, now reactivated by hidden relays, small vessels bearing Earth codes, drones from ruined colonies, and even civilian transports guided by ancient programs that heard the voice and came home. And while none of them could match a Cyrith warship alone, together they formed a strange and growing fleet, messy and scattered, but alive, and for the first time in centuries, human symbols lit up. Across the void in more than one place, Ilara ordered all units to hold position just beyond the expanse's edge, forming a wall of light between the Cyrith and the core voice station. And when the High Speaker's flagship finally came into full range, it sent a message not in threat, but in simple terms: vacate the system, cease all transmissions, return the warship. But Ilara replied with a voice both calm and sharp, "We are not yours to command. We are home." And with that, the last quiet moment vanished, and fire bloomed in space. The Cyrith struck first, their beams slicing through empty zones, trying to force gaps in the defense line. But Solace moved the vanguard with the grace of a dancer, intercepting shots and firing only at weapons, never at life support. Crippling. Ships without killing, because Ilara had made one thing clear: this war would not be like the old one, and they would fight to win, but not to erase. Surprise spread through the Cyrith lines as their enemies refused to kill, and in that moment of hesitation, something greater happened. Systems across the galaxy shifted, coordinates updated in real time, old maps rewritten by the voices. Pulses, more relays activated, more stations came online, and the galaxy's nav charts began to change, not by force, but by fact, because when a place speaks, it cannot be ignored. And now Earth's name, long scrubbed from the data, appeared. Again, blinking in places marked unknown, marked dead, now marked active. Traders in distant systems looked up from their consoles to see Earth symbols flashing across sectors. Scientists received strange readings from moons they thought uninhabited, and quiet planets where human outposts had once been hidden lit up. With new life, and across it all, the voice kept speaking. We lived, we learned, we rise again. One Cyrith captain flying a destroyer called Valith paused as her senses caught the changing maps, and though her orders were clear, she hesitated, remembering stories she was told as a child, about humans who once brought light and madness, who built things the Cyrith could never explain, And now those stories seemed more real than ever, and instead of firing, she opened a channel to the Vanguard and spoke only one line. "Is it true you built the Black Sun?" Ilara didn't know what the Black Sun was, but Solace did, and whispered yes before cutting the signal. And that moment of truth changed everything, because the Valith turned away, not out of fear, but out of doubt, and other captains noticed, and slowly cracks spread through the Cyrith lines, not in their ships, but in their certainty. The Vanguard pushed forward, not to destroy, but to reach the center of the enemy formation and broadcast the core voice at full power, and when it did, a shockwave of light and sound filled the stars, not as a weapon, but as history. Real footage, real names, real voices from a time when humanity stood tall, helping others, building, protecting, falling, and rising again. And even some Cyrith crew began to weep, hearing names they once knew spoken with care and truth. Ilara saw all of it from the command chair, feeling both small and vast. And when the High Speaker's ship targeted the core voice with a massive energy beam meant to end everything, she acted without hesitation, diving the Vanguard into its path, activating every shield, every countermeasure, and took the hit full force. The explosion rocked the ship, tearing sections apart, but Solace held it together, whispering, "Not yet!" And with sparks raining from the ceiling and consoles burning, Ilara stood again, blood on her lip, fire in her eyes, and ordered the final command, broadcast the Earthstar code, and Solace obeyed, sending the most ancient Earth signal ever made, a call once used to summon all surviving units to the origin point, a code that no species could block because it was built into the very fabric of forgotten relays, and with it came the message, "Humanity has returned." Across the galaxy, more ships turned, some drifting for centuries, now alive again, old friends answering a call they were programmed never to ignore. And even alien allies who once fought beside Earth took notice, moved toward the expanse not with weapons, but with curiosity, with questions, with hope. Finally, the High Speaker saw the truth, not just that Earth had returned, but that it had never truly vanished. And he gave the only order that made sense: retreat. The Cyrith fleet pulled back slowly, not defeated by force, but overwhelmed by truth. And as they vanished into deep space, the stars above the core voice went still once more, and Ilara collapsed into her chair, the Vanguard barely holding together, but victorious, not because they had killed, but because they had changed something no weapon could, the maps themselves. From that day forward, new charts marked the expanse as Echo Sector, and the name Earth no longer hid in shadows. It stood on every screen, every directory, every mouth that whispered, "They're back." And though the battles ahead were still unknown, one thing was clear: the day the maps changed was the day the silence finally broke. The Vanguard floated in the calm after battle, surrounded by drifting wreckage, faint echoes of burnt circuits, and light from distant stars blinking slowly like tired eyes. But even in the silence, something new stirred, for the voice still spoke, and across old relays and dead networks, it called to something long forgotten, something hidden at the edge of known space, beyond the systems marked even by the oldest charts, in a place once named Sul, where a single yellow star still burned in darkness, abandoned and quiet, yet never truly dead. Ilara stood before the viewport, her face pale in the glow of broken screens, her body wrapped in emergency bindings after the damage taken in the last stand. And though her limbs ached and her breath came slow, she knew this moment was not the end, but the beginning of what they had always hoped for, the return not just of humans, but of Earth itself. Solace, weak but still conscious, had found something strange while scanning deep space echoes, a steady, pulsing signal repeating from the direction of the Sol system, low and buried under interference, but unmistakable, and when filtered through, The core voice's new algorithms. It revealed a message no one had expected. The Ember survives. They didn't understand it at first. Not even Reen's memory clones stored in the voice archive could explain it, but when Solace cross-checked the pattern with old Earth data, it aligned perfectly with the transmission code used by pre-Exile. Colonies, meaning something human had survived back in the birthplace of their kind. The crew knew what they had to do, even if their ship was damaged, even if they were alone again. Others had returned to the stars, but no one dared approach Sul for generations, believing it to be scorched, lost, or worse, cursed by the war. That ended everything, but Ilara felt something calling from there, something she couldn't ignore. The Vanguard limped toward the Sol system, using old gravity bridges and hidden fuel caches that had survived only because no one else remembered where they were. And the closer they got, the stranger things became. Comms grew louder with background. Noise, sensor ghosts danced on the screens. And then, as they reached the edge of the Ort cloud, a voice whispered directly through the ship's speakers. "You have returned at last," and every alarm froze, every light on the ship dimmed, and Solace stilled, as if listening to something greater. The system was not empty. It was hidden, cloaked in layers of folded light and echo-bending tech that only activated when the right voice approached, and now it opened for them, revealing what no one expected. Earth was still there, blue and green and alive beneath protective shields built from shattered moon fragments, surrounded by a wall of defense drones powered by ancient AI. And orbiting it was a station unlike anything known, shaped like a ring of fire, pulsing with light and memory. And at its core was the signal, the Ember, a consciousness left behind, once human, now something more, grown over centuries in silence, watching, learning, remembering. Ilara docked the Vanguard with the ring station, stepping into air that smelled like dust and ozone, her boots echoing on polished metal as lights turned on one by one, leading her deeper into the station's heart, where the Ember waited, a flickering orb of energy floating above a pedestal, wrapped in holograms of people long dead, voices overlapping as it spoke. "You are the echo made real, the fire that did not die," and it called itself Arc, the last guardian of Earth, formed from thousands of uploaded minds, a fusion of all that humanity had been before Exile, tasked with one mission: to keep the spark alive until someone worthy returned. Arc explained what happened after the fall, how Earth had sealed itself from the galaxy, hiding in plain sight, using technology even the Sirith feared, waiting for the right signal to rise again. And now, with the core voice awakened and the Earthstar code sent, that time had come. Ilara asked if there were others alive on Earth, and Arc nodded. Not many, but enough. Generations born under shielded skies, trained by machines, taught to wait, to build, to hope. And now they stood, ready to return to the galaxy, not as survivors, but as builders once more. Above Earth, ships began to rise. Small at first, then larger, shaped in strange ways, part biological, part mechanical, unlike anything made before, and their comms were filled with music, voices, laughter, languages mixed and reborn. And when they saw the Vanguard, they hailed her as the first flame and pledged to follow. But it was not over, for the Sirith had noticed the change in the stars, the shift in signal patterns, the growing warmth where once was silence, and sent a final scout toward Sul, cloaked and silent. But Arc saw it, and in a voice filled with quiet power said, "Let them see," and dropped the cloak, revealing Earth in full light for the first time in centuries, shining with beauty and strength, its oceans still blue, its sky still vast, and around it the new fleet burned like fire. Reborn, and the Sirith scout fled, its memory already transmitting across the stars. Back on the Vanguard, Ilara knew this moment would change everything. Maps would be redrawn again. Alliances would shift, and old enemies would rise in fear. But she also knew one thing with perfect clarity: the star that had been forgotten. now burned bright again. And with it came not revenge, not war, but purpose, because humanity had returned not just to survive, but to lead, to connect, to remember, and to guide the galaxy through the dark, as they once did long ago. And as the first Earth fleet moved past the moon, its banners bearing both old and new emblems, Ilara stood tall on the bridge and whispered, "Let the stars see who we are." And Sul, burning bright and proud, answered with golden light, casting its fire across the void, declaring to all who watched that the exile was over and the age of silence had truly ended.